Hi there. Welcome to the From Lab to Launch podcast by Qualio, where we share inspiring stories from the people on the front lines of life sciences. Tune in and leave inspired to bring your life-saving products to the world. Now let's get started with Robert, Qualio founder and CEO, and our show host.
Ron Shigeta is a serial entrepreneur and startup biotech pioneer. He's also been a serial founder, having run startups in AI drug tox detection and synthetic biology. Ron holds a PhD in chemistry from Princeton University, where he spent his academic research career focusing on secondary metabolic biosynthesis, diabetes, genomics, genetics, structural biology, and systems biology. Outside of work, Ron spends his time at Laney College, establishing the world's first community college program dedicated to synthetic biology. Ron also serves on the advisory board for the Center for Food, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship at the Business School at Santa Clara University. As an entrepreneur, investor, scientist, and mentor, Ron shares some great insights to anyone who wants to contribute to life sciences, and I'm incredibly excited to have the opportunity to chat with him today. Welcome to the show, Ron. Incredibly excited to have some time with you today and ask you some questions and learn a bit about your journey, which is definitely an interesting one. And I think you're at a very exciting space at a very exciting time. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. It indeed is. It really is.
I'd love to kick off briefly with if you could give us a really short introduction of your work you're doing with Alix.
I'm an investor. Alix is just a seed fund. It's a small fund. And we're here to help some really promising biotech companies start to make their dream a reality. We are working within biotech platforms. So we prefer really deep biotech. We've invested in DNA writing. We've invested in promoter control of genes and libraries. We've got an organoid company that's really hot right now that's trying to do deep clinical, like therapeutic research and discovery. We really want to get a handle on the technologies that are going to make the next 10 years different for pharma than it has for the previous 10 or 100, you might say.
I was just going to say a previous 100. I think aspirin was on the market a long time before the semiconductor revolution, and as it moved forward as much as pure tech has.
That was like the only drug for quite a while. Now that was a different time for sure.
Maybe an unfair example to use because of that. And maybe before we dig into the trends, what's happening right now, which is a definite hobby horse of mine in an area I love to talk to people about, I'd love to go back a bit and what were your influences? What or who influenced you and made you want to take this path?
I'm going to start in a very sort of typical place. I have a PhD in structural biology and protein structure, and I love deep science. And I got a great job coming out in a startup coming out of my PhD experience. And it just kept getting nicer and nicer. And I stayed there for 12 years. And I was running a team doing bioinformatics and genome analysis and all this great stuff. But at some point, I just realized this is not what I want to do the rest of my life. And I could not see what I was going to do next. And I think a lot of people getting their PhDs now feel that way much younger than I did. And so this being San Francisco, I just decided I'm just going to do something. And I just started networking. There's lots of networking events here. And I ended up opening a biotech innovation space called Berkeley Biolabs. As a garage, you could come in for $100 a month and have a biotech bench. And that quickly turned into getting hired by SOSB, which is a venture capital fund, and going to build IndieBio, which is the world's first biotech accelerator. I was a scientific member of the staff, so I built the lab and the companies came in, we funded them, and they had 3 months to get some good scientific ammunition for demo day. And so I did that for a few years, and then I did a startup, and now I'm working with Alix. And I do advise several investors. I met so many investors when I was in IndieBio and helped a lot of funds get started. So it was a great place to sort of create a new career, and it happened just like that.
Looking at your background, it looks like a straight line, as often it can do from the outside, but the reality when you're driving is you don't exactly have the map figured out. IndieBio is fascinating, and I could spend a bit of time on that if you don't mind, because that Sean O'Sullivan, the person from Cork, Ireland. I'm also from Cork, Ireland, so I got to fly the flag and represent there. But
awesome.
That was the first at Berkeley Biolabs. I was aware of that really before IndieBio kicked off.
Wow.
But Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But the SOSV thing and IndieBio in particular was the first time I noticed, and I could be so wrong here. You can correct me. I decided not to research before this, so I could be a novice on air with you here. That was the first time I saw a startup accelerator model getting applied in a space which felt like the only companies that could win are like back in the day, you had SAP, IBM, and Oracle, and a few companies like that, and it was impossible to get to market without being this big vertically integrated stack. Now across bio, like funding companies with small amounts of capital and making progress, I felt like new science, I think, even 5 years ago.
It was really, I have to say, I'm really proud of IndieBio, and I am like totally grateful to Sean O'Sullivan because he let us do it. Being the first person on the dance floor is the hardest thing in the world.
Yeah.
And I think biology had been there for a couple years, but we got in there and the lab was reasonable for the fund to build. And biotech has simply gotten cheaper over the past 20 years. If you think about a typical PhD thesis, you're looking at scores of genomes in a typical data write-up of a thesis. 20 years ago, there was one genome in the entire world. And so there has been, it's been really interesting that nobody was aware of the cost drop of actually building a biotech. And now $50,000 to $70,000 will get a biotech off the ground. A lot of founders can pool that money and start doing work, get some crummy data, and they're on the road. But IndieBio helps people get started basically from zero.
Yeah.
It was different, and it's really caught on. I'm really excited about it.
Even 5 years ago, looking back, it looks like obviously this was a good bet, right? Even what you were doing in Berkeley, all this looking back, yeah, obviously this was the tipping point was starting to happen back then. Was this?
It was totally, you know what?
Yeah.
Sean, SOSV is in a position to try to do experiments and let things fail. Very few funds will do that. And that's the main reason they are where they are. I think there are other biotech accelerators going on, but there's just a handful in the entire world still. Building the infrastructure upfront with the money from a venture fund before you make an investment is something a lot of people are prepared to do. I think that structure will change, that will become more common in the future, but it's still not very common.
We have public biotech companies pre-market still, like we're working with them as customers and we love to support them. We even noticed this incredibly interesting is we have a biotech company, different products and slightly different therapeutic areas, but like categorized as a biotech company, public market cap, 50, 100 people. I think we'll work with like a IndieBio style, like maybe a more, I won't necessarily say more modern, but like a new wave biotech company is like, we've raised a couple $1 million. And I'm like, wow, this is really interesting.
Think about like the mix, like just if you can do it geographically in the area, that's probably more pronounced, but like how many small companies versus do you have percentage wise in the Bay Area?
Oh, we definitely skew towards, we call this and like the emergent ecosystem. And we have a really strong thesis as a business, which goes back to why did we start this company? And I won't go into too much depth because your story is more interesting here, is that there's, I think once upon a time you had Oracle, SAP, IBM, and that was like what it took. And there's a democratization of the technology and go to market. And now look at all the public, like everything now is a multi-billion-dollar business, and that's how technologies work. I think we're at a tipping point that's going to tip faster than the pure software industry tipped over, and it's happening this decade. Is going to completely change how this world looks. That's what I love. I love the companies that are at that point because it's
great, and it's really super great that you structured the company to handle those customers from the get-go. It's hard to switch into that market once you've started with the big players.
Yeah.
And so I commend that, and I think a lot of companies are doing software as a service for biotech should really understand that. I actually am on the advisory board for Laney College, and they are creating the first synthetic biology program for community college. So we're innovating on the educational space too. I think 38% of the graduates go to companies under 10 people.
Yeah.
They're putting out all these tech level trainees. It's a great program, but like it's increasing how many small companies, they're going to be dominant very shortly. I think in terms of hiring.
And it comes down to the speed these companies can move at. being resource constrained, have to find novel ways. Like I wasn't around when servers went from $10 million to purchase to free. I would imagine those people who can like look both those would go, wow, this is so similar. It's amazing right now. So like that's why we love what we're doing.
I don't know if you've seen it, but actually even McKinsey published a report that said the 21st century is going to be dominated by a biotech economy. I'll send you that link, and maybe you can put it up in the description. But McKinsey says it publicly like that. It is so bloody obvious. You're a smart guy for Quality is pretty smart for setting up the way it is, because you are getting ready to ride the wave, and that's the kind of investment I like.
We hope so. It's fun right now, and we look at all the other things we see, and I want to get your thoughts on the trends that you look at. And I see things like YC Bio. I believe it's public now. They say that's their biggest bet. Is they're not the next Dropbox or Stripe. It's the bio bet. They think is going to be their next big. And Dreesen, who very famously said software is eating the world. And I love this phrase because they just say trademarks. Everything they say becomes like a phrase for the tech industry. But they said software is eating the world. They had been doing that for a while. And they said in January, they launched BioFund 3, it's a $750 million fund. And the phrase that's always stuck with me is bio is not the next new thing. Bio is becoming everything. And you couldn't miss that. And people who are repeatedly smart and successful in firms. And if you look at the signals now, I think it's starting. It's not quite obvious yet, but if we meet again and have another chat like this in 3 years' time, it'll be, of course. Yeah, how could you not? It was always there. Right. It's like, look at your background. It looks like a straight line towards where we are right now, but you never really know in the background.
Just like socks.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing the first sort of web browsers. I'm dating myself, but I remember seeing the first web browser going, that sounds interesting. But you couldn't tell how ubiquitous. You could say it's going to be ubiquitous, but you don't feel it in your gut. When you feel it, the reality is emotional. And that emotion transition is the hardest thing to do if you're trying to be visionary. Like, you can understand it, but the rational doesn't create action with them. Actually, a good phrase that popped in my mind is software is getting full. The ROI of most of the companies actually flattening out now, and that's why the funds are moving over. There are a few extremely powerful investments to make in software still, but the number of them are smaller. And so in order to the statistical average of return on investment for the funds mean that they're going to move to biology. They all have. COSLA, we have worked with COSLA, we work with Innovation Endeavors, we work with YC. All of these funds are moving to bio. And it's interesting to see how they feel about it. I think the one thing that they've done is it's hard to retool in midstream. And Paul Graham started YC based on the idea that the Y Combinator is this exotic piece and a pun of computer science about an accelerator. And he only wanted people who understood that to come in. But it's hard to understand biotech that same way and create an accelerator the same way. And I think the YC is still in transition there in terms of really understanding the culture they're trying to invest into.
Yeah.
A lot of us are. Even me, there's a lot of things I'm still learning. It's a big change.
So we covered several really big trends. What else do you see? Is there anything that you're seeing now that's a trend that people should be paying attention to? And again, like one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast in particular is healthcare feels impenetrable. Like, how do you understand it? It's hard to conceptualize, but I think there's a lot of things happening that everyone can see. And hopefully as people look at, I can do something in this space. What is happening you're seeing?
I want to see, I think there's a topic that we're probably not going to talk too much about. Half of my time is associated with the fact that biotech is democratizing into every other field. Just like computers, biotech is now starting to get its fingers in and increasingly and improving the products in almost every manufactured good, including in some cases things like metal and mining. We had a company that had a microbiome that would actually suck the extra atoms of metal out of the slag and return it back to the mine. And so we just don't know where the limits are there. But within biotech for healthcare, I think that the same impact is happening. Healthcare, you go back, actually what you said about aspirin really is still striking, right? There were no drugs in the early 1950s. Penicillin had just showed up, and like the 3 drugs that are out there would improve the lifespan by several years, the average lifespan. And now we have thousands of drugs, but we don't have control. We can't see disease. We cannot treat most disease. There are too many genetic factors. In some cases, it's not a disease. We're just fighting our own biology. And the goals have become loftier: life extension, neuroregeneration, organ growth. All of these things are completely different ways of thinking about medicine. And we talk about them, but it's a completely different world for a doctor after these technologies become available. And I think, and so there's a lot of exciting investments out there. I think what we have to focus on is that technology enables medicine, but the treatments are still really expensive. And so what do we do? How can we change the regulatory system? How can we change the way that we treat medicine as a technology to try more things? Because these fields are unprecedented, and they really can't be treated the same way a small molecule could be. So I think that will be interesting to watch, and it may not happen in the United States.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's one book I recommend people always when we talk about this, because everyone's always excited about going to Mars, deepest trenches in the oceans. We understand so little about our own bodies that it's actually amazing. We don't actually spend more time as a species kind of digging in. I always recommend a really accessible book. It's by Bill Bryson. It's called The Body, a Guide for Occupants. I'd recommend anybody to read it. It's accessible by anybody. And every chapter almost ends with the statement of, and we have no idea why that happens. This seems to work. Great. We don't know why it happens. And after you get hit in the face with that so many times, you go, wow, we have opportunities here. And I always think that's a really great intro. How are you applying all this at ALEX? So you have a lot of learnings now.
We are learning a lot. I think what we're doing is actually, ALEX is an unusual fund. And I love working with Chaz, the GP, because I think he's really got the vision of what's happening in venture capital. So another thing that's happening in venture capital is there is a lot of money now. There isn't any there aren't just, and a lot of people see venture capital and they're starting to participate. But 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there were a handful of funds down in Palo Alto. Now, I haven't found an accurate count of the number of funds that are global, but I think it's well over 1,500 funds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of them under 25 million. Yeah, but the problem for a startup now is not getting access to an investor. The problem for a startup is convincing investors that you are going to return. And that is still very rare. And when a really good investment comes along, everybody jumps on it. What's really great about ALEX is that we are building networks that are going to help people find the right investment, find the right help, and the information that they need. The experience, the average level experience of these startups is also lower. And so we have to deal with that. We have to make sure that people are prepared to deal with a partner, that they're prepared to talk to somebody about helping with their clinical. And some people are just a couple of years out of their PhD, or even even faculty members for the first time. You don't get that being a professor. And so there's huge gaps still to cover. And I think that the social network will do that.
I think it sounds like a great solution. With all the experience, for people who are listening, what's one thing you think as an industry or an ecosystem we should start doing to help the progress?
Let me ask Robert, who is trying to help here? Because there's so many different parties, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's fair. I guess where I spend my time it's the people you mentioned. The example we always use is phenomenal engineers or biochemists, and they've figured something out, or they believe X and Y will equal this output. But how do they get that?
How do you actually get it going?
Yeah.
I think one of the things, I was talking with a friend of mine who did clinical diligence for one of the big companies. And he would sit on this committee, saw 200 potential partners go by in a couple of years. And I think the biggest challenge facing any startup that I've ever worked with is they don't know who else is out there, and they don't know what they're saying. You think your pitch is pretty good, but you didn't see the other 250 pitches this quarter that the VC saw. You don't know how common your idea is. And the same is true when you go talk to a clinical partner. Until you have some inside dope, you don't know what they're looking for. You don't know what they really think. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to let everybody in the audience in on a clue. Academia is not a good place to get that. And if I went through that, I think you went through that. Nobody ever just sounds like, this is what the clinical process is like. Nobody ever tells you. You have to go there. But fortunately, there are a lot of people who are interested in talking about it. So the podcast is a great place for that to happen. And so are ALIX's sort of built-in communities that we're doing. So I think it's a matter of getting out there, realizing you have a deficit of experience. And there are resources starting to come about now where you can pick that up, but do not assume that you are too hot to trot. Like it's not a good attitude, because the process for pharma is just so expensive, it's so complicated. Anybody who thinks that they can handle it just from where they are, I would never fund you. If you have that, like, I know you're smart, but that's not the point.
Yeah, that's a good answer to the next question, is what should people stop doing? And I think people should stop overestimating the impact they have when they walk in front of people like that. Yeah, it's tough.
And you can have a PhD from MIT and you will get a lot of attention for it. But being honestly smart is not just where you've been and what you know.
I get that. Ron, you've been really awesome today. Just before we close off, I want to ask, is there any information that for people listening to this, you want to get in touch with ALIX or you? Is there anything you want to make sure that we share? We can add it to the show notes at the end.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I love people to connect. And that's a great place to get a hold of me. I think you have my profile. I'd love to talk to you if you think you have a great idea and you just want to get some advice. Happy to help.
I'm sure people would love to chat with you as well. I've really enjoyed this, Ron. You've been really awesome. Thank you very much for joining. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Robert. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of From Lab to Launch, brought to you by Qualio. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and give the show a positive review. It really helps us out. For more information about Qualio, our guest today, or to be a guest on a future episode, please refer to the show notes. Until next time.